Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. My name is Sarah Grindstaff, and I am a member of the Dole Institute's Student Advisory Board, the official student group of the Institute. The Student Advisory Board is a bipartisan group whose members can access many great opportunities through their involvement with the Institute, including volunteering at programs and networking with our special guests. If you are a student and would like to join, please contact us by emailing dolesab@ku.edu or by speaking with a student worker after the program. After the presentation, we will have some time for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student worker with a microphone will come to you. Please stand if you are able and ask just one brief question. If you have difficulty hearing during the program, please alert one of our staff members or student volunteers who will assist you. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. And now, please join me in welcoming Director Bill Lacey.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you all for coming out. We have slightly better weather tonight than we did for the rest of the series, so thank you all for joining us. I'm Bill Lacey, the director of the Dole Institute, as Sarah said. And this year, the theme for our presidential lecture series is Follow the Leader, 4 Women's Journeys in Public Service. Now, I want to particularly thank the 2 members of KU's faculty who developed this series for us. I met with them last year and proposed that they assist us with doing this, and they did everything, literally everything. They put together the concept, they recruited the guests, they specified people for other activities and things, and they've just done such an outstanding job. So I just want to thank Professor Mary Banwart, Professor Shannon Portillo for doing such a fantastic job on this series. Now, tonight's interview will be conducted by Dr. Mary Banwart. In addition to serving as an associate professor in the Communication Studies Department here at KU, Mary is the director of the Institute for Leadership Studies and the program and academic director for the Kansas Women's Leadership Institute. Her primary research focuses on political campaign communication and the influence of gender in political campaigns. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Banwart, who will introduce her guest. Mary?
Thank you, Bill, and thank you to everyone for being with us tonight. We have the distinct pleasure to spend the evening with Judge Robinson. And first, let me share with you just a little bit about her story. She is a 4th-generation Kansan and is the first African-American named to the U.S. District Court for the District of Kansas. Judge Robinson is a true Jayhawk. She received her undergraduate in journalism and a Juris Doctor from the School of Law here at KU, where she taught trial practice courses to KU law students, served on the KU School of Law Board of Governors as president, and has served on various committees for the school. After law school, Judge Robinson was a clerk for U.S. bankruptcy judge Benjamin E. Franklin from 1981 to 1983. She then became an assistant U.S. attorney for 10 years, handling civil and criminal cases. When Judge Franklin died, she was appointed to fill his vacancy on the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the District of Kansas, where she served for 8 years. In 2001, President George W. Bush appointed her to the U.S. District Court for the District of Kansas, and she now sits on the federal bench in Kansas City. She is a fellow of the American Bar Foundation and received the Distinguished Public Service Award from Baker University and the Distinguished Service Award from the Kansas Bar Association. Judge Robinson is a past chair of the Court Administration and the Case Management Committee of the Judicial Conference of the United States. And Judge Robinson also serves on the Board of Trustees for the American Ends of the Court Foundation. For her nomination to the Emily Taylor Women's Resource Center Women's Hall of Fame here at KU, one of her nominators stated, quote, "As a judge, Judge Robinson models the highest standards of integrity, intellectual rigor, fair treatment, and considered, thoughtful handling of the people and the legal issues that come before her court. Throughout her legal career, she has upheld the highest standards of the profession and modeled professional excellence for the many lawyers who have worked with her and appeared in her court. And her colleagues add that Judge Robinson, quote, has carried the banner of the crimson and blue with the highest standard of leadership. Please join me in welcoming Judge Robinson. So Dr. Portillo and I have put together a list for this series of questions that we wanted to ask all of the women that we invited to be part of this so we could learn a little bit more about all of their various journeys in their different stages of their career. So we're going to get started with the same question that everyone else got, but it tends to be one of our favorite. So, what did you want to be when you were 5 years old? And how did you end up in public service?
I know you're not going to believe this, but when I was 5 years old, I wanted to be a lawyer. Because I watched Perry Mason. My parents let me stay up late at night, past bedtime to watch Perry Mason. I was obsessed with Perry Mason. I wanted to be a trial lawyer like Perry Mason. I knew no lawyers. My family knew no lawyers. No one had ever gone, there were a few that had bachelor's degrees. No one had ever gone to law school or graduate school. But that's what I wanted to be. And, you know, looking back, my parents were all over that, particularly my father, telling me, you know, as I went through grade school, I was led to believe that every grade I made in grade school, somebody would be looking at to determine whether I got in law school. That farce continued through middle school and on into high school. And, you know, it's remarkable because I've had a number of conversations with peers, women peers of my generation that became lawyers, or not, but that told me that their families didn't encourage them. I mean, they heard things such as, well, you know, there just really aren't a lot of women lawyers, and you know, or there aren't African-American lawyers, or it'll be too hard, or if you want a family, you can't do that, or any of that. I never got that message from either one of my parents. All I ever got was, if you want to be a lawyer, you're going to be a lawyer. And I didn't recognize and appreciate the gift of that from them until many years later. But that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be Perry Mason.
All right. So as you think about your job now, how would you describe what it is that you do?
Well, I am a trial judge on the federal bench, U.S. District Court, and which means that I have a caseload of civil and criminal cases. The caseload of federal trial courts is not quite as broad as what the caseload is of state district courts, which are, you know, organized by county. Douglas County has judges, Sedgwick County, Johnson County, et cetera. But it's still fairly broad variety of cases, and I'm assigned the case from the time it's filed. At this point, I probably have about 300 cases in my inventory in all stages of, from very beginning filing until, you know, the very end, or even on to appeals that are handled by another court. And it's a really nice mix of cases. Very much, I'm a generalist. Trial court judges are generalists, so we're not specialists. We pretty much have to figure out what we're doing in a wide variety of cases, civil and criminal, which is very challenging, but it's what I think one of the things I appreciate the most about what I do. So we are making a lot of decisions along the way in cases, in particular in civil cases, that shape the case in the sense that we're deciding what claims have legitimacy, what parties have legitimate claims. We're making decisions along the way oftentimes that help the parties decide whether they want to settle the case or go to trial. The vast majority of cases settle and don't go to trial. Probably more than 95% of civil cases end up settling or are dismissed by one of our decisions. And then on the criminal side, similarly, we are making decisions along the way that may shape the case and would help the parties determine, help the defendants determine whether they want to plead, help the parties figure out what kind of plea agreements they may want to negotiate, or whether they want to go to trial. When these cases go to trial, the small percentage of them that do, the trial judge presides over the trial. Most of the trials are jury trials, but some trials are trials to the judge, and I'm the one that makes the decision.
So when you think about the work you're doing in public service, what do you feel are the most core values for you that you get to live out in this kind of work?
Fairness, objectivity, allegiance to the Constitution and the rule of law. I should have memorized the oath. I should know the oath, actually, that I took as a judge, but there's a part of that oath, and it is a core oath, actually, that all public servants take in the federal system, in all three branches of government. But there's a part of the judicial oath in particular that talks about administering justice without regard to whether someone is rich or poor, without regard to their station in life. And the oath doesn't say this, but also without regard to the size of the case. And so it's important to place as much importance on a case where the controversy may be a few $1,000s or $100,000 as a case where the controversy may be in the millions. It's as important to take seriously and give the same amount of attention to a case where someone is charged in a criminal case with a relatively minor charge as opposed to someone who may be charged with something that's facing a life sentence. So just understanding that every litigant that comes in front of you is as important as the next, no matter what their charges or what their claims are or what they're defending against, is important. That egalitarian spirit and lens through which you look at your work is important, is an important core value.
And as you've thought about the work as being a lawyer since you were 5, when did that really settle in for you that this was going to be the career path and the set of values that would guide you in this work?
I think I really figured out that I might have the skill set, and I certainly had the interest, but that I might find real joy in this in high school. When, and I don't remember who, but someone suggested that I get involved in debate, policy debate in high school, and I loved that. I learned to research, I learned to write, I learned to advocate, and it was a very natural transition from that. Of course, there was the interruption of 4 years of college, but a natural transition from that into law school. I think that gelled my interest in the law because so much of that had to do with the law.
Okay. So when we think about gender in public service, we know that there continue to be disparities at multiple levels and across multiple career paths in public service for as wide as that particular area is. How has gender shaped your path in public service and specifically the law?
Well, when I graduated from KU Law in 1981, I believe my law school class, it was a watershed year. As I recall, I think there were 30% women, which was considered very significant. And of course, since then, we've seen it move to more, the needle move to more 50%, sometimes above 50%, sometimes below. It can change, it can be different across different law schools, but generally speaking, about half and half. But when I entered the workforce as a lawyer in 1981, there were very few women lawyers. There were very few lawyers of color in the Kansas City area. And I chose a career path. I mean, I first clerked for a bankruptcy judge for 2 years. And I have to say, in the bankruptcy bar, it's a transactional bar. It's kind of a business-oriented bar. It was predominantly male. And that I didn't really become a member of that bar at that point. I clerked for this judge. But then I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I had a mixed caseload of both civil and criminal cases. At that point, there were 5 of us in that office, and 3 women and 2 men, and over time, the mix changed, but usually it was about half and half. But in particular, the criminal prosecution work that I did in the U.S. Attorney's Office, it was a man's world. The investigative agents who I worked closely with were almost without exception men, and most of the criminal defense lawyers were men, and most of the prosecutors were men. And I remember going to a conference. It was a federal, state, local conference of prosecutors and law enforcement agents for the state of Kansas, probably in about 1984, 1985. And being in a ballroom, a hotel ballroom of 200 or 300 people, I don't remember, looking around, and I don't recall there being another person of color, and I remember there being only one other woman in that entire ballroom of prosecutors and law enforcement agents. That other woman was Carla Stovall, who went on to become the Attorney General for the state of Kansas and, a pioneer in doing that. But it was a man's world, and it was not a world, it wasn't an area of practice that I think women were really accepted or even expected to practice in. And it was quite a challenge to make my way there and to convince these investigative agents that I could handle their cases and I could do it not only adequately but really well. And that happened ultimately, but I feel like those first few years, a combination of my gender, my youth, and probably my race played a part in not being accepted as someone that was worthy of prosecuting the cases they investigated. As time went on, more and more women came into our field, and it became more comfortable. You'd go into a courtroom. I mean, now there are times I go in a courtroom and it's all women or all people of color. Usually not, but I mean, usually, you know, it's not unusual to see diversity in the courtroom anymore among the lawyers' ranks, and that's a happy place to be. But when I came out of law school, it wasn't just in terms of prosecutors and government service. I mean, if you looked across law firms in the Kansas City metropolitan area, very little diversity of gender or race. Anywhere you looked, it was that way.
Can you speak just a little bit to this, the strength that comes with greater diversity, though, in law? Well,
I'll give you an example. I think, I'm talking about in the context of, say, a criminal case. And if you walk into the courtroom as a woman, as a judge who is a woman and a woman of color, I detect that there are defendants, and they may not be African American. Maybe they're, you know, Latino or Asian or some other person of color. I sense a feeling of more comfort or more assurance in them that, okay, this isn't going to just be a lot of, you know, white men and me. She may be different than me, but, you know, she's not cookie cutter either. And I mean, I think having diversity on the bench and having diversity in the people that represent other people provides a great deal of assurance to everybody, whether they are people of color or not, or male or female, that the system is fair, that people of different backgrounds, different experiences are involved. And just having a diversity of experience, whether you're talking about gender or race or anything else, a diversity of experience is a strength. If you're representing a client as a lawyer, you may not be the same gender and you may not be the same race, but yet you may have some common experience that your client will understand, you understand them. You get something about them because you have that commonality, and that's important. The worst thing I think that can happen for a client is to feel like my lawyer doesn't get me. They are so different from me. Anything I tell them about my experience is not going to resonate with them. Or to look at a jury and to feel the same way. So the strength in diversity is just to provide the assurance to people that we understand one another. We may be different, but we've had enough life experience that may be somewhat similar that you can trust that we'll listen, we'll understand, and if we don't fully understand, we'll know that we don't understand and that we need to work in understanding.
So as you've moved throughout your career, and we talked a little bit in advance of this, mentors have played an important role. And we hear that and have heard that across our entire series. So as you think about mentoring for your career, can you talk just a little bit about what that's meant?
I have had so many mentors. I probably ought to try to write down every name I can think of. You know, it's somewhat like people that you share life experiences with. Some people are mentors for your entire life, and other people come along beside you for one particular purpose or one season in time, but they're still an important mentor. And I've had a lot of those kinds of mentors. I've had women mentors who are older. I've had women mentors who were peers, who I worked with. I've had a lot of male mentors by virtue of the fact that, you know, it was a male-dominated profession. Starting in law school, I had mentors and professors who saw in me something that I needed help with. I like to talk about Danelle Taha, for example. Many of you know her. She was my property law professor. She went on to become a judge on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals and the chief judge, and then later she retired and became dean of Pepperdine Law School, and she's a Lawrencian. She's back, but I remember, it wasn't too many years ago, this is something I'd carried with me ever since law school, which sounds kind of silly, but I remember saying to Danelle, who'd become a friend, "Why did you pick on me in law school?" And she said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "In property 1 and property 2, I'm keeping count, right? In property 1 and in property 2, every other student, you would split a class time. You would ask Karen Arnoldberger and Jan Carlin, and they get to share an hour. But both semesters, you spent a whole hour on me. Why did you do that?" And she said, "Because I wanted you to know that you could do it." That's a mentor. I didn't recognize it at a time, and she's somebody that's been a mentor for me professionally throughout. Then in law school, and then maybe there's a gap in time, but she's been professionally a mentor in the sense that over the years, many times she's called me and said, "You know what? I think you need this sort of extracurricular experience. You need to serve on this board, or you need to work on this committee. It'd be good for you, and you'd be good for them." And so that's somebody that's mentored me in that way. Many of the judges, really all of the judges that I practiced in front of in the 10 or 11 years that I was an assistant U.S. attorney were mentors. They were awesome people in the sense that, and back then we litigated a lot more. We tried cases a lot more, so they got to see the lawyers in action, but they would give you feedback. After the case was all over and the appeals had finished, they'd give you constructive criticism, and that's mentoring. I had peer mentors when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're here tonight. Jan Carlin and Karen Arnoldberger. The three of us, 3 young women, mothers. We had babies while we were in the U.S. Attorney's Office, one after another. I think we had some sort of written pact. We wouldn't have babies the same year, so we could help each other out and share maternity clothes and children's clothes and that sort of thing. But we went through a lot together, and we mentored one another. But I've had, mentors from every direction, male and female, who have helped me professionally, have helped me expand my horizons professionally, have helped me become a better lawyer, have helped me become a better judge. Even as a judge, I have mentors today, other judges in particular, who have helped me become a better judge and have helped me also to do other sort of extrajudicial work that I've chosen to do.
So undoubtedly, you now are also widely in a mentor role and have been for quite a long time. What's your philosophy then as you but as you mentor younger women or just younger individuals wanting to pursue law?
Well, the philosophy is somewhat the same as in what I experienced. For some people, I think I might be one of those lifelong mentors. For other people, it may be very abbreviated and specific what I can help them with. So, like all other judges, at least in the federal judiciary and on the Kansas Courts of Appeal and Supreme Court, we have law clerks. So we are sort of required to be mentors. It's a gift that's given to us because we have these young lawyers that graduate from law school that come to serve usually 1 to 2 years at a time with us. And then they're going to go off into private practice or government service, and they're there to learn everything that they can about what a judge does and about deciding cases, but also substantively about the law. But also they're there, I think, to be mentored. And the judge that I clerked for, Benjamin Franklin, he taught me Life 101, I say. He taught me about practicing law. I hadn't practiced law when I was a law clerk. That was my first job right out of law school. I knew nothing about practicing law. He'd been a U.S. attorney, and so he kind of wanted me to follow that path. He actually wanted me to follow in his footsteps and to replace him when he retired, and as it turned out, I did replace him when he passed away. But these classes of law clerks that come to you, there's a natural mentoring relationship that happens, and it tends to persist even after they leave. So as they're trying to make decisions about their career trajectory or about professional development or even personal development, they come back and ask you. So that's those are some of the lifelong. But then there are women lawyers in particular, and some young men as well, that will come and really be seeking mentoring advice for specific purposes. Maybe they're trying to ultimately become a judge, or maybe they're trying to make partner, but they're looking for advice in terms of how to find projects or how to find community organizations that they can serve. So sometimes it's a very limited period of time. There are law students, that want the same. Most judges, we have externs from law schools that work with us for a summer or for the school year. Again, very much a mentoring relationship develops. Sometimes they end up becoming law clerks for you as well. But so I look at mentoring as something, it's really defined by what the person needs and what they're asking for you. They may be asking for you to be their mentor for life, but they may be needing you at that particular time, that season, for something specific they're trying to accomplish.
So as a mentor, what would be advice that you might give to a young woman at KU today who is considering a career perhaps in law, but even public service more broadly? What is the advice you might give to her about pursuing that career path?
If they're at the consideration stage, they need to study, and they need to talk, not only study, but they need to talk. They need to explore, they need to investigate. And what that looks like is they may need to take certain classes. They need to get over the law school and use the opportunities that are there to talk to people, to go to a class and see what that looks like, to talk to law students, to talk to law graduates. If they're interested specifically in a career in public service, the same. There's so many careers in public service. There's so many careers in government. There's 3 branches of government. There's state, local, and federal government. There's a lot of different experiences and a lot of people that would be willing to talk to them. So I think to start with a period of exploration and investigation. What I would try to impart on them, though, is that no matter what type of government service, and that I look at being a lawyer as being a public servant, even if you're in the private sector, because you are still serving members of the public and you are still very much in a caring and serving type of relationship. You're a counselor at law. What I want to impress upon people is the law is a space. It's a place where you can care for people and care about people and make the world a better place. And whether you do that in the private sector or the public sector, that ought to be your focus, and that ought to be what you're doing. And in particular, if you want to think about public service in a government organization, I want people to understand what an honor it is to work for the government. I think something that's grieved me a lot over the last 30 years is this sort of demise of government service into something that's sort of second class, or there's something wrong with people that work for the government. It's an honor and a privilege to work for the government. When I was an assistant U.S. attorney, to stand up in court and say, "My name is Julie Robinson, I represent the United States of America," I mean, even now, I can get tears in my eyes thinking about that. What an honor and a privilege it is to represent the United States of America. That's all of us. That's our interests. And no matter what you do, whether you represent, the city of Lawrence or the state of Kansas, or, you work for some agency, the work is so important, and we're all serving the people of our state and our country, and it's an honor. And I want people to start looking at government service as an honor again. And so when a young person comes to me and tells me that they're interested in that, they get the soapbox speech from me, because I want to impart in them how important it is for bright, passionate, caring people to enter government service. We're going to make it honorable. It's still honorable, but we're going to impress upon everybody that it really is an honorable profession.
And so why, from your vantage point, with everything that you've seen, especially so many of the cases that have come before you, why do we need more women involved in that civic sphere and in the civic space?
Well, we need more women in the judiciary. We need more women in the law, because it just makes sense that everything we do affects everyone, men and women alike. And it makes sense that those of us, whether we're in government and we're creating or implementing or executing policy or legislation, or if we're in the judicial branch and we're helping people adjudicate their disputes or deciding those disputes, the people we're talking about are women and men. They're people of color and people that aren't of color. They're everybody. And so, it's not a hypothetical sort of theoretical relationship. When you're a lawyer, you're sitting across a table from someone and you build a relationship. And that person doesn't have to look like you. But again, if you have an experience that person can resonate with, that helps, that relationship, and it helps you be a better advocate for them. And sometimes, that commonality is because of your common race or your common gender. Sometimes it's because of something else. But it's important to establish good relationships with people in order to represent them well and to represent their interests well so that they can get the best outcome possible. And the more diversity we have in government service as well as in judicial and legal service, the better it is for every single person that needs those kinds of services.
Good. So we often hear on campus, we'll have undergraduate students come seek out career advice, and often we hear that choices regarding career for especially young women have to do with what they perceive might be a work-life balance. What is your advice to the work-life balance question? And that could be for men or women, but it seems to be a common thread that we hear from young women on the Hill.
Well, I don't know if I have a ready answer for that, frankly. I struggle with whether balance is even the right term to use. In looking back at when I had small children and I was a trial attorney, which was very difficult, it was very much having a schedule that was not within your control, having to be in court, having to be in trial, having to take a deposition, having to travel, having to talk to a client who really needed you, something urgent, but yet having children that had urgent needs as well. There were times that I felt like the balance, if it is a balance, tipped towards my family, and other times that it tipped toward my job, and either tip of the scales didn't feel so great. I mean, what you want is you want to be all things to all people at all times, and that's never possible. I would say don't beat up on yourself too hard. Do your very best, but understand there are some times that you're going to feel like you're not as present as you need to be in either sphere. But if you work really hard, I think generally speaking, you can feel that you're doing the very best you can at any given time. When I was in trial, I might be in trial, I had trials that lasted months. I'm pretty sure if my children remembered, hopefully they don't, they would say it wasn't balanced at all. I mean, she wasn't around. And I mean, but there are things you do. So even when I was in trial, I would finish the trial day, and people that, litigators, the work doesn't stop, so you have to work at night to get ready for the next day. So my practice would be to go home as soon as I could, have dinner with my children, put them to bed, and then if it meant I had to sit up till 2 o'clock in the morning, so be it. So, that's where I struck that balance, but I'm sure that they would say there were times that it just didn't work out that well for them. And conversely, I'm sure there were times that I felt like I wasn't as attentive to work as I would have wanted to be because something was going on at home. You just do the best you can do. But, I have had times in my life when I became a judge, I remember my son, who I thought was kind of oblivious to what was going on in my life and me going through the nomination process and becoming a judge and what that meant. I'm just mom. I'm nobody. Just kind of as an aside, I remember I said something about Wikipedia. Wikipedia had only been around for a few years, I think, and he was talking about Wikipedia, and I said, oh yeah, I have a Wikipedia page. And he goes, no, Mom, you don't understand what Wikipedia is. You don't even know what it is. Let me explain it to you. I said, no, look it up. I'm on Wikipedia. I'm saying that. No, Mom. So it was like, your kids, look at you through different lenses, but when I became a judge, I'll recall, he looked at me and he said, Mom, I am so proud of you. And when you recognize that your children are proud of you, even though you've been a flawed parent, and there have been times when the work-life imbalance has really been off balance, it's affirming to know, okay, I made the right decision. I made the right decision in trying to make this all work. It didn't work for the best, but there were times it did work. And in the scheme of things, I know my children are proud of me, and I know I could have been a lot more present, but I think they're proud of me, and I'm happy with the decision that I made. And I think that's the way you have to look at it. Because, whether you're a mother or a father, whether you have 5 children or 1 child, or whether you're taking care of an aging parent or a sick spouse, or, there's all kinds of challenges in life, not just parenting. You just have to do your best and not beat up on yourself. And actually also understand that in going through that, it makes you a better mother, it makes you a better judge. When I have a case or somebody's testifying in my court or something, and they're talking about challenges, and maybe they're not talking about work-life balance, but I think I kind of get it because I've lived it. I mean, having those kind of difficult life experiences and working through that makes us all better people.
So we are going to open it up in just a moment to the audience for some questions, but I have a final question for you to bring us a little bit back full circle. So if you think back to that 5-year-old who was watching Perry Mason, what would be the advice you would give to her sitting here today?
Well, that every grade you make in grade school counts. Your parents were right. That it doesn't matter whether you're a woman or a man, or black or white, or middle class or upper class or working class, or whether you got a B in geometry. It doesn't matter. If you really want to do this, you can do this. And don't be dissuaded by people that talk about the challenges or the work-life balance or anything. Don't be dissuaded by that. If you really have a joy and a passion for doing a particular thing, just do it. Do your best. It won't be perfect. You're flawed. The experience will be challenging no matter what, but just do it.
That's really great. Thank you. Yes, you can give her a round of applause. So we would like to open it up for questions from the audience.
So this is the easiest Q&A ever.
I'm just curious, you mentioned you have 300 cases. Who assigns, how do you get those cases? Are they assigned to you, or how do you do that? How do they happen to come into your court?
The computer assigns them. It's a blind draw. Lady Justice is blindfolded. So we're not in a system where we get to pick and choose or that anyone does that for us. And it works out over time. I mean, there are times that a particular judge may really have a heavier or more difficult caseload than the next, but overall it works out. So it's literally a computer assignment, civil and criminal cases. There are times you wonder, it's like, is this really a blind system? But it is. It is.
Could you speak to the issue, this is a big issue in the legal community, of civility in the courtroom and your methods for trying to manage that?
Well, the judge is sort of the person in the courtroom that is supposed to manage civility. And it's not just in the courtroom, it's also on paper. So I think most judges would tell you that, because most of us spend, at least trial judges, most of us spend more time working with paper and briefs and making written decisions than in the courtroom. And I think we would say that we're as concerned about civility in the paper as we are in the courtroom. It's very hard as a decision maker to cut through the chaff and to, focus on what's material and what's not immaterial when there is what you know to be immaterial noise in the background. And that's what that kind of behavior is. So when lawyers are in the courtroom and they're not being civil to one another, we have certain rules, of how they're to conduct themselves in the courtroom. So when they're like sort of talking to each other and not addressing to the court, that's background noise. And it's not helpful to the decision maker who you're supposed to address your arguments to. In their written submissions, when they're attacking each other, they often do it in footnotes, because I guess they think we don't read footnotes, but we do. Attacking each other personally and using all kinds of ugly adjectives to do that, that's background noise. And the effect of it is, and sometimes what happens in litigation is you really do have one side, it may be the lawyers, it may be their client, it may be both, that really are kind of acting out and the others aren't. That when the other side is making that sort of background noise, as the decision maker, we view it as background noise. I mean, everybody's a culprit. So it's far better to take the higher road and to be civil and professional, even when you're encountering somebody that's not, because you kind of get pulled down in the mud with them as a lawyer if you engage in the same sort of back and forth. It's sort of like, coming outside and seeing your kids fighting in the sandbox, and you're not sure who started it, so everybody's in trouble, It's that sort of thing. But it really can affect the quality of justice. And another thing people, I think lawyers need to think about is, sometimes their clients are really the ones that are fighting like this. But if lawyers don't take the high road and get pulled down to, where their clients are, they're not serving their clients well. I mean, clients really need their lawyers to be the adult in the room and say, you know what, I know this person has hurt you. I know this is traumatic. I hate that we're now here in litigation. But, we got to get through this in the most calm, professional way as we can. But when the lawyers, sort of devolve down to where the clients are, it doesn't help the client at all. And it actually doesn't help the lawyer, and it's quite an annoyance and a distraction for the decision maker, which is never helpful. We have codes of conduct as lawyers and judges. We have pillars of professionalism that the Kansas Bar Association has adopted. My court has adopted it. That really are, some of them are aspirational, but most of it is just common sense. How do you treat people? How do you treat people with respect and dignity?
Could you talk just a little bit about how difficult it is to separate out politics from the law, and how careful you have to be, and how you go about demonstrating to people that you are capable of separating the two and that you actually are separating the two?
Well, I think I speak for all judges when we say that I think one of our areas of operational pain or grief is our feeling, and this is based on, the noise that we hear in the media and in blogs and just in people's voices, this sense that we don't separate politics from the law. Now, I'm a federal judge that I went through a political process in the sense that I'm a presidentially appointed person with the advice and consent of the Senate. But it was a Senate that was majority Republican, but I mean, I got 99 votes, one person wasn't there, and that's not an unusual situation. Once we become appointed to the bench, we are apolitical. Our judicial codes of conduct prevent us from being political at all. I'm not allowed to have a bumper sticker. I'm not allowed to have a yard sign. I'm not allowed to talk about politics in public in any partisan way. I'm not allowed to talk about issues that are pending in front of me. I'm not allowed to talk about issues that may pend in front of me. I have to be a seer. My First Amendment rights are pretty limited, and as are all judges. And because the importance of that is so that people understand that we are apolitical. Our allegiance is to the Constitution and the rule of law, which includes precedent by other, courts that we have given precedential authority to, such as the Supreme Court, and in my case, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And so the experience of judges is at any given time, we may make a decision that if we were king of the planet, we would have gone the other direction. But we can't do that. We have to be allegiant to the rule of law. We have to be allegiant to broad principles as applied to the case in controversy in that particular case. And it's not about, doing sort of armchair justice. It's not about even equity or what we might perceive as equity. It's being allegiant to the rule of law. Sometimes that means we make difficult decisions that maybe we don't even like. And that's the oath of office that we take, and that's what we are committed to do. And it does, I think, grieve us. For example, when we hear, commentators talk about, or sometimes I've even seen this in decisions I've rendered. There's an account of the decision, and then she was appointed by X, or he was appointed by Y, which doesn't factor, I guarantee you, doesn't factor at all into the decisions that we make. I'm on a court. There are 6 of us that are district judges, and we have magistrate judges as well, and then there are some senior judges. And the presidents that appointed the judges on the federal court for the District of Kansas span from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump, and every president in between, all right? And I would venture to say that if you gave us the same case, same issues, and we all wrote our decision and we laid those decisions out, in probably more than 95% of the cases, the outcome would be the same, and you probably couldn't discern who wrote which decision from the analysis that we did, because we're all tied to applying the rule of law. Now, Having said that, there are times that we are making a decision in an area of law that no one else has trod. And, you know, that may be a little bit different, but generally speaking, the outcome's going to be the same, or the analysis is going to be very much the same, and it's because we're following the same rules of law.
I formerly was involved in engineering education, and we've worked very hard over the years to try to increase the number of females in engineering. You mentioned that when you were in law school, the fraction of female were very low, but now it's about 50%. Are you aware of any dedicated, pointed project to try to change that percentage, or did it just happen?
That's a good question. I know that a number of professional organizations back in the 80s when I was graduating from law school and becoming a lawyer were very focused on increasing the number of women in particular, and also people of color in the legal profession. Did a lot of studying, and I think there were a lot of people that just worked on it on an individual basis, would see bright young students and really encourage them. So there definitely was affirmative work. I think over time, and maybe because of that work, the word got out that this was an attractive profession not only for men but for women. I would imagine with engineering, that's the kind of message that has to be continually reiterated as well. But I think a lot of people worked to get us where we're at today. And women do exceptionally well in law school. I don't know about other courts, but for example, on my court, there are more women law clerks than there are male law clerks. And law clerks are people that are hired usually from the top 10% of their class or so. So they're doing exceptionally well.
Hi, and thank you for being here today. I had a question with the lack of diversity early in your career. Did you ever have someone confront you, a colleague, that questioned your ability to be there for your race, your gender, or your age, and how did you just reply to that question of your right to be in the room?
I never had a colleague that I worked with. So for example, anyone in the U.S. Attorney's Office that in any way, directly or indirectly, ever did that. I had a few experiences, and not very many, with lawyers that were on the other side of the case and were, in my view, disrespectful, and I felt like it was because of my race, because of my gender, because of my youth, probably because of all three. In particular, it was easier to see in the context of being in the courtroom with other litigators and just the disrespect. I remember being in a trial once with a very the other side, a criminal defense lawyer, was a very senior lawyer, well known in Kansas City, and when it was a jury trial, and when he would address or talk about anybody else in the courtroom, obviously the judge was Judge whoever, everybody else was Mr. this or Mr. that, witnesses or whatever, and then I was always referred to by my first name. So the way I decided to deal with this, I think the judge, he just kind of went over his head, but I was very disrespectful. So the way I decided to deal with that, and of course I have a jury, and it's a jury box of mostly men, but some women as well. Every time I got up and I addressed that lawyer or said anything about that lawyer, I would emphasize Mr., let's just say his name was Smith. Mr. Smith said, da-da-da-da-da. And I did that, 3-4 times, and I'd look at the jury, and then they started getting it. And then he'd get up and start calling me Julie again, and I'd look at him, and they were just, So you pick your strategies. There's so many ways to deal with this. I mean, that was not a scenario, that was not an environment that I could confront him back unless we were on a break, right? It would have been uncivil to do that, and it wouldn't have been effective. But it was effective. To the extent he was disrespecting me in front of the jury, I think I gained some respect for the jury because they understood what he was doing, and then they saw my response, and he was totally clueless any of that was going on. So, but no, the answer to your question, not with colleagues. I did experience some uncomfortable things with, a few defense lawyers, and certainly with the investigative agents. It took me a while to sell myself to those FBI and Secret Service and ATF agents, DEA agents. They weren't too crazy about me at first. So it took a while to bring them around.
Any final questions? Yes.
If a young person who is going to start college this fall, if a young person who's starting college this fall would come and ask you, what courses should I take in order to prepare myself to be a lawyer? What would you tell them?
That's interesting because there's so many courses that can be helpful. I mean, I remember going to law school with somebody who was a hydrologist. You know, he'd majored in hydrology, and he was a hydrologist and engineer. He came to law school to do water law. He had a very focused, but if somebody that thought in general they wanted to go to law school, they didn't know what area of practice, I mean, I would say pretty much a very varied curriculum, liberal arts. It's very important to learn how to write well. I think a lot of people focus on the oral advocacy piece, but the written advocacy piece is more important than oral advocacy. Most lawyers, the majority of lawyers aren't going to be in courtrooms very much. But they are going to have to engage in written advocacy on a daily basis, whether it's in the context of litigation or whether they are, you know, trying to write a letter to the other side or, you know, somebody that's in conflict with their client and convince them of something. So written advocacy. So, you know, that can happen in a lot of ways. I chose to go to J school. I thought I needed to shore up my writing skills, and I thought, and I was in newspaper editorial, and in retrospect, I think that was a good major for me because it taught you how to write shortly, succinctly, and it was very factual and investigatory at the same time. But you could do that in a variety of coursework where you're required to write, you know, research and write papers. That's a very good thing to develop as well. I'm not suggesting that oral advocacy wouldn't be a good thing to do, take a speech class or something, but I wouldn't say emphasize that as much as the written advocacy. A lot of people, of course, major in political science or history or government. I mean, that's great, but you know, you don't necessarily need to major in any of those things. I think it's far more important to come out with the ability to research, to write well, and to think critically. You might want to take a class in logic, for example, or something, you know, philosophy-based to engage in a little bit of critical thinking. College debate would be great.
Well, please join me in thanking the Honorable Judge Robinson for a wonderful evening. And thank you to you for being part of our series, and most importantly, for being really a true inspiration to so many people in this room and beyond. So thank you for the work that you do.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm always happy to be here in this wonderful space in honor of a wonderful man in Senator Dole, and it's always a pleasure to be here, so thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the Dole Institute of Politics for supporting our series on women's leadership in public service. And please check your program for upcoming programming, and also check the website because you'll want to watch this again and share it with your friends. So please remember that the video recording of this will be posted on the website, and you can spread the word. So thank you very much for coming this evening. Good night.